Turning points change the course of our lives, whether it's a big decision, overcoming an obstacle or tragedy, or taking a leap of faith. These stories of inspiration and resilience are what Turning Point is all about. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Turning Point. I'm your host, Priya Sam, and today I am honored to have Perdita Felicien as my guest. Perdita is a world champion hurdler, an Olympian, an Olympic broadcaster, and an author. So, no big deal at all. Today, we're going to chat about all of that and so much more. Perdita, welcome to Turning Point.
Oh, happy to be here, Priya.
I feel like I only listed like half of your accolades in that list. I mean, you just do it all.
You know what? I've done quite a few things. It's so funny though. Sometimes, if I'm doing something, they'll be like, "Well, how do you want to be referred to?" And I'm like, I don't know. Like, can you fit 7 or 8 in there in like one title? So I usually narrow it down. Olympian, author, speaker. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have done so much. You continue to do so much. I first heard about you during your track and field career when you were a hurdler. I remember watching you race, and it really wasn't until I read your book earlier this year, My Mother's Daughter, that I learned the story of you and your family. And I've heard you say this in some of your interviews. Today we're going to talk a lot about your life, but you yourself had even said, you couldn't tell the story of your own life in the book without really telling the story of your mother, of course, and of your family. And it's such an incredible story of overcoming hurdles, not just in track and field, but in life. So, You know what, let's start there. I know it'll lead us to your turning point. Mm-hmm. You were born here in Canada, but your mom grew up on the Caribbean island of St. Lucia. So tell us what her life was like there.
Yeah. So she grew up in the late 50s, early 60s. And, my mother's life, I didn't know all the details of it when I started writing My Mother's Daughter. And so a lot of the book is mining her early life because she would reference stuff to me growing up, like, when I had you, you gave me hope. And she said, like, she always tell me to value my education because when she was a kid, she never was able to. So come to find out, my mother had to drop out of school by the time she was like in grade 5 or 6. So by the time she was around 11 or 12, and then she went into full-time selling. And she had to sell on the beach, as a beach vendor to vacationing tourists to help her family make a living. And she loved school, but, it wasn't anything that, my grandparents, her parents could value because they clearly needed her to help them survive. And so, my mother's life was one where she didn't really have a childhood. It was a happy childhood, yes, because her parents were good to her, but it wasn't like this playful childhood, were her growing up on the island.
Yeah, I mean, and in the book we learn some of those details that you had just shared. And for anyone of you listening who haven't read the book, I mean, I just encourage you to read it. It's such an inspiring and incredible story. So your mom does eventually, of course, come to Canada after she was asked to come be a nanny for a family that she met in St. Lucia. And in the book, we find out she worked for them for a short time before moving on to another position. And in these jobs, she really wasn't treated very well or paid very well. One of the stories that really just stuck with me from the book was the night she went into labor with you, actually, and her boss asked her to make them sandwiches before she went to the hospital, which is just horrifying.
Yeah.
So as you were revisiting some of these stories with her and writing the book, what was that like for you to hear all of this?
I'll be honest about this, and I've probably only said this once before. When I was, and I'm not super proud of this, but when I was writing the book, and you know how it is, right? When you're like a reporter broadcaster, like you just want to get the story right. So I did a really good job of like disassociating myself from those details, like Catherine, my mother, and, this child who clearly, yes, was me. I was just like, I'm telling this story, like it's not me. And it wasn't until the book came out this year that was a point for a lot of people. A lot of people sunk their teeth into that part and they're like, I cannot fathom her being told she had to make food in active labor before her employer would drive her to the hospital to have her baby. And I think that is when Priya, I was like, holy crap. Yeah. And I think that's the first time that I truly was like, holy crap. Like, clearly I know this happened to me and my mom and our family, but I think I was just so concerned with telling the truth of this story and getting the details right. And I think that's why the story is so visceral and so vivid, is because I wanted every detail. And it wasn't hard for me to get those details because I took, my relationship out of it. But now that I'm going back and the book is out and it's down, it's like, wow. So to answer your question, no, it wasn't super hard, but to know what my mother faced, to bring and to give me life and to give my siblings the life that we do have now, it does pain me to know the difficulties and the indignities that she had to go through.
Yeah, I mean, she overcame so much, and your whole family did, and she took so many chances to in coming to a new country, of course. One of the other challenges was the abuse that she had suffered at the hands of your father as well. Also, something that you really go into more detail on in the book. So you and your mother, your older sister, you eventually ended up in a shelter. I believe you were 7 years old at the time. What do you remember about that?
I remember a lot. And what's so striking about auberge, and auberge is French. I learned that through my research, for shelter, and so that was the name of the place. Currently, though, the name of that place, the women's shelter, is the Denise House. And that's because it is named after a woman who unfortunately was killed by the hands of her partner. And through my research in the book, I learned that Denise was at the women's shelter at the same time as me and my mother and my sister. And my mom was pregnant at the time. So when you ask me what I remember, I don't remember Denise, and I don't remember, the faces and the names of a lot of the women there. But what I remember is loving this place. Loving it because, there's all this food in the fridge. That's awesome. That's new for me. There's endless toys and crayons to play for. And, my mom was laughing and smiling and just happy. And I didn't understand that this was a place that we shouldn't have to be at. We were fleeing, my dad's house and his abuse. And, but I do remember it being a place where I saw my mother flourish. And I felt happy to be, but not truly understanding until, years later, of course, understanding that, wow, these are safe havens that women in our communities will need and do need. And as much as we wish and we hope that we'll never have to have them, chances are we will, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember watching one interview that you and your mother actually had done together. I believe it was with CBC, and for both of you, it just quite emotional talking about this moment and this time you spent in the shelter and how life-changing it became, because it really did eventually lead to this big turning point, which you identified as this moment when your mom finds out that your family has a place in co-op housing in Pickering, and you say that this really changed everything for you.
Yeah, that was my turning point. And of course, I was, maybe 8 at the time. And so you don't think of it in those terms, right? Like, this is going to change our life. But it did, because what happened is, so my mother gets a phone call that she has a co-op house in Pickering, Ontario, unit number 8, shout out, 1555 Finch, I'll never forget. She takes the place. Taking the place means she has to leave my dad. And he doesn't like that. He's not happy about that. And he makes it hard for her. Like, we leave with not a lot of things in our possession. But the reason that was a turning point for us because for the first time, my mother had been in this country over a decade. And this is the first time that my mom had her own place. And my mother having her own place over her head, Priya, means she now had autonomy over her life. When she, what she could do, the decisions that she could be made, how she wanted to live as a mother and as a woman, that was in her control now. And what happens when a woman thrives, what happens when a mother thrives, is her children start to thrive and they start to bloom. And that's what happened. And, then I discovered sport. Then my mother was able to get work that she truly enjoyed. She became a healthcare aide. They call it personal support workers now, PSWs. But she loved taking care of elderly people and nurturing them. And she loved that. And I really, looking back now, was like, that's when my mother was no longer under the oppressive thumb of my father. My father would, when we lived with him, he would turn off the electricity in the house. So we were in pitch blackness. My father would, as a way to control my mother, he would come in and just turn off the taps, turn off the water. So we had no drinking water, while we were home, and he'd just leave, right? He'd leave and go to work. And that's what my mother was used to. That's what we were used to. But for the first time, my mother got to call the shots. And when she got to call the shots and have control over her life, that is truly when things turned for us as a family.
Wow. I mean, I read this in the book, but kind of hearing you say all over again, just how drastically this changed. I mean, really your everyday life, right? And even just that comfort you would have felt in this setting, without having the stress of your father, there. I can understand how that would have changed everything. You also just mentioned how this is where your introduction to track and field came. I believe you were about 10 years old at this point. So tell me about that. And when did you really know that you had this talent for running?
Yeah, I think I had no clue. My mother had no clue because just girls didn't have that opportunity with her growing up. It was mainly boys that did sports. So I remember being in Mrs. Arthur's grade 3 class at Glengrove Public School. And there was this organized program that all students did across the country called Canada Fitness. I still have my badge. And, they would give you awards. Like if you didn't do really well, but you participated, you get like a participation pin. And then it would go from gold, then it would go down, it would go from bronze to silver to gold. But then there's a level beyond gold. Who knew? Excellence. That was the excellence badge. And I was the only one in my grade 3 gym class to get that badge. And Mrs. Arthur's made a big deal out of it in our gym class. And I remember just feeling like I would and I say this line in the book, I would burst into confetti. I was so excited because I was the only person in her class that got that. And she made that moment a special moment for me. And that's the first time that I was ever singled out and recognized, for just individually as a person, but then also because you're athletic, you did something that no one else has done. And I remember being giddy on that. And so I wasn't old enough to do track yet, but the next year she found me and made sure I signed up for the track and field team. And of course you need your parents' permission. So I had this permission slip one day after I made the team. And so I got to get my mom to sign it, and I rush home and I open the door and my mom is vacuuming, and I'm so excited. Mom, guess what? And she's like, what? I'm like, I made it for the track team. And I'm freaking out because I'm so happy. And my mother, and I found this out as I was writing and researching, my mother had no clue, Priya, what track and field was. She had no clue what I was talking about, what I was referencing, but she realized that there was something in my face. There's something about my expression, something that I was so happy about. She said, I'm not going to dim her light. And so my mom was like, honey, that's awesome, right? Playing along. And then she went back to vacuuming, of course. But for her, it's she has something that she likes. I don't know what it is, but let's go with it. My mother had never done sports like that because in St. Lucia, it wasn't just, like I said, she started to work by the time she was a tween. So it wasn't anything that she could just go out and play. So having a child suddenly saying track and field, organized sport, foreign language to my mother.
Wow. Oh, I love that she just leaned into your excitement. And I mean, I feel like this story actually is really kind of sums up her support of you through your entire career. She just has always really been your number one fan.
Yeah, she really has been in my corner every step of the way. And honestly, every day I marvel at the woman that my mother is, because she, as unconventional as our family is, right? I don't know my biological father, never met him, don't know anything about him. And my mother, despite him abandoning her and maybe possibly having some animus towards me, in her womb or even at birth, never has, right? And I marvel at that and I wonder at that and her capacity to love, even though this man completely deserted her. They didn't have a long courtship, if you even call it that, but yet my mother all my life, every day of my life has always shown up for me. And I'm in love with her because of that, because she taught me how to love. And so now I have a 2-year-old Nova who I love because I know what love is. I know what a mother's love is. And so then I know how to pass that on. I know how to give that to my own child. And of course, I say we're unconventional because, my two older sisters, or my two older siblings rather, were in St. Lucia while my mother was trying to make it in Canada with me. So she had to leave them. But even when my mother got her townhome in Pickering, she brought all her kids under that one roof. Even though it had been years and years and years since she had seen her older kids, my mother could have left them there. My mother could have just said, I'm going to stay with my Canadian-born child, raise her, send money back home like I've been doing. But my mother knew the rightful place was with her. And so it was hard, right? It was a very difficult thing. She didn't have a lot of resources, but she still made that happen. So when you say that and you see that on the page, like, it makes my heart smile, because that to me is what My Mother's Daughter is about. It's about a woman, being unapologetically who she is. Like, I feel like my mother took the handbook for what it means to be, a woman by society standards. She burnt it, right? And she's like, I'm doing my life and I'm being me. Forget your blueprint or what you think it should look like. This is who I am, and this is who I'll be.
I definitely got that from the book. And I wondered, actually, because you are so open, so honest, even about some of these really difficult times. Was there any point where you thought about, or your mother thought about maybe we should leave this out, or maybe we should censor some parts of this story?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And, I've read and consumed memoirs for a really long time. I love nonfiction. And I think what frustrates me about some books that I've read is, as a reader, I can tell when the author is not being revealing and not being completely transparent with me. And that kind of upsets me. They're leaving something on the table, like, tell me more. And so I always knew if I wrote my family story that I wouldn't do that to my reader. I would let you know the truth of who I am, because I think when you tell the truth of who you are, you show other people, or you allow other people to be who they are. And I think for a long time, there was shame in, being a child who's like a bastard. Like, my parents weren't married when they had me, my siblings, same situation, or, my mother being a teen mother, us being, not really having a place to go and living at a women's shelter. There's all these things that could have brought us shame. And I think I would have been doing us a disservice by cloaking some of those things or framing certain scenes to maybe make us look better. And I started out when I first started writing, saying and promising to myself, I will not do that. And if I wanted or felt tempted to do that, I would just leave something out. Like, I would just not write that scene at all or whatever. But so to answer your question, no, it wasn't ever. It was definitely hard to revisit some of these things, but I was never tempted to say, now, do I put some stuff out there that I know is super personal, super revealing? Yeah. Right? Like, how hard is it to go back and interview my mother about the night that I was conceived, or how my origins were? I didn't know that story, but I have a daughter, and I knew that one day she'll ask me who I am. And honestly, Priya, I didn't have the answers. And I owe it to her and her children, if she chooses to have them, to be able to have a map of where you came from, right? And, you've read the book. I open it with a quote by Iyanla Vanzant, which says, the best thing that a woman can do for her children is to tell her children her story as a woman. And here is my mother telling me her story, which allows me to freely just be who I am. So, there's really no hesitation when it came to that.
Just hearing you say that, I mean, it's so powerful. And I think there is so much value in sharing that openly and honestly, like sharing those successes. And there are so many, I mean, overcoming so many obstacles and all of these high points, and sharing that alongside some of the challenges. It just becomes so relatable to so many people, right? Or people who might be in that situation and who say, hey, like, I don't know who my father is, or my mom had me as a teenager, and might see that as a barrier. Whereas for your family, your mom was able to turn that into the motivation to keep going and to find a new way and to make things better for you and your siblings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that is the thing. Like, a lot of people asked, did you have any pushback from your family? And before I ever, in October 2014 is when I started to write. I had the idea 2 years before, but I kept not starting because I was just clicking my heels, or spinning my wheels, I should say. And I brought my whole family together. and said, I have this idea. I want to write our story. And it was in my sister's kitchen and all our family was there. And the truth is that if my mother had said no or had any hesitations, I wouldn't have started. This book would not be in your possession today. I would not have had it. But she gave me her full blessing. And of course, I'd revisit certain scenes and parts with her to make sure that they were accurate and she was okay with them even being mentioned. And my mother said to me, the reason why she okayed my mother's daughter was twofold. One, she knew that she didn't have all the answers for me as to who I was and how I got here and where is my dad. I've never seen this man, never met this man. I couldn't pick him out of a lineup. And so she knew that I had to unearth some things for my own self, my own humanity, right? So she knew that. Two, my mother is a survivor of domestic abuse. And she's always wanted to tell her story or let other women know that it doesn't matter how long it takes you, but you can move past that and not be defined by it. So she was saying, if you tell the truth of this part of my life, maybe a woman who's experienced it or is experiencing it will feel empowered enough to know that change is coming, that I can change my circumstances. And if you think about those two things together, like it's such a powerful, selfless gift to give to someone.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And there's no doubt that it already has helped a lot of women and a lot of families. Fanshawe College has always offered a wide range of programs, and that now includes micro-credentials. So with these courses, you can earn digital badges to add to your social profiles, and there are so many to choose from, including diversity and inclusion for leaders, fostering employee engagement, even podcasting. Those are just a few of the options, and the best part is that they are all verified by Fanshawe College, a trusted institution that is a leader in part-time adult education. You can find out more about Fanshawe's micro-credentials at the link in the show notes. This theme of overcoming obstacles, we've talked about it a little bit in your family. It also really was part of your track career early on. So we talked about these early days, that kind of first burst of happiness when you got this recognition for doing so well on the fitness test, and then you were in 8th grade. You had a big race where you lost to someone else, and then you kind of gave up track and field for a little while there. So what made you decide to pick it up again in high school?
Yeah, I got my butt whooped in grade 8 going into high school, and then I never went back. Like, what a sore loser I was. My goodness. So, you know what? It was, and this is still like my mother for 2 years of quitting track would nag me, right? And she was very consistent and adamant about me going back to track and field. Constant. And it was super annoying. And you've been a teenager, right? Like you think you know everything. You know, if your parents ask you or tell you to do something, you push back against that because clearly if they say to do it, then it's completely what you shouldn't do. Or you should be doing rather. And for me, finally, after 2 years of that, plus there was a gym teacher there who I talk about in the book, Mrs. Masales, who cornered me in the hallways because she had remembered from elementary school that I was really good. So the combination of being cornered in the hallway and my mom hadn't just been on my back for years over this thing, I was like, fine, I'll just do it to shut this woman up already. Honestly, that was my mentality, right? And I wasn't planning on sticking around. I was just going to go and appease my mother so she could shush up. And then, that would be that for the track and field thing. And then it stuck. It got, I got good at it. I still didn't love it, but I got really good at it. And then it just kind of took off. And she was, of course, in the stands screaming and carrying on and just the happiest mother of them all because of me doing track again.
Oh, yeah, I bet and I'm sure there was that mother satisfaction of, I knew that she should pick this up again.
Yes. To this day, Priya, to this day, okay? I'm 41. She's still on it.
I love it. So you end up with then a scholarship to an American school. You make the Canadian Olympic team compete in the year 2000. What was that experience like? Because that's actually a very short amount of time to have gone from just picking it back up again. And now you're at the Olympics.
3 years, which is unheard of, right? Like just raw talent, raw ability. You know what? It was unbelievable. because it was like, oh, this is what people dream of. And I'm actually here. This is what people work a long time to be at. And, being at the Sydney Games was, and I write this scene in the book. I remember, because it's on the other side of the world and we have to acclimatize, we were gone for 6 weeks. And I remember leaving and getting to the airport and my mother being so sad because I'm going to this other country first time. And she has no money to give me. So could you imagine going away for 6 weeks to Australia and you don't even have a dime? You don't even have $1, right? So you can't buy a calling card. You can't buy yourself a drink. You can't get yourself out of trouble if that happens. And of course, I'm with the national team, right? I will be fine. But there's something about having a little pocket change. If you want to buy a chocolate bar, there was none of that. I know looking at my mom, there was this sense of like, oh, I let you down. Like I have nothing to give you here. So being in Sydney for me was quite overwhelming because I hadn't really had the years and years of build up to it. And so I did appreciate it. I did know it was the pinnacle of my sport. So I appreciated it then. But again, because I'd only been in this sport for 3 years, to me, it was almost like, oh, this is a great big field trip. Like, this is awesome. These athletes are amazing. But I still didn't have any designs on doing it like as a profession or forever. And of course, my mother was super proud that I was there because here's her child on TV, here's her child, racing the rest of the world. And for her, it was almost like, aha, see, I told you to run track and field. I knew this would happen. Like she kind of predicted it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the book, I can feel her pride. And I'm sure, even though you were on the other side of the world, I'm sure you could feel it too. Mm-hmm. You know what? Just hearing you say that was 3 years from when you started again. I mean, I knew it was a short amount of time, but it's unreal.
Yep, I know. And then I think so too. I look back, I'm like, huh?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it really is. And then 3 short years after that, you're a world champion in 2003.
Fight. Out of the blocks very quickly is McKelvey being pushed by Golding Clark. Now here comes Felicien. Perdita Felicien is in the lead. Foster trying to track her down. Felicien in front. Yes! Felicien is there for the win. 12.54. A personal best for Perdita Felicien.
So how did life change for you after that, massive win?
Oh, honestly, Priya, if I could take that feeling and bottle it up and sell it, I'd be like a gazillionaire because it's such the euphoria, how you can get drunk on a feeling of that ultimate high of winning something and besting them all. And, the stress and the anxiety of building up to that moment, then it going exactly how you planned it is exhilarating. So yeah, 3 short years later, it's almost like now I'm a name that people, even if they can't say it, they can recognize it, right? Like it's a lot of a name, but it really put me on, the map, especially on a national scale in Canada. And then in track and field, people were like, whoa, this, I was the youngest world champion in the history of my event at the time. And I was still in university. So people were like, whoa, this girl is the real deal. It changed my life in that, suddenly I'm given sponsorship deals and I'm on the cover of magazines and, Cheerios boxes and those sorts of things. And it really allowed me for the first time not to have to worry about money because I had a sponsor. Nike was my sponsor. They were paying my bills and taking care of me. So that was really, really nice. And it was, again, one of those things where you're like, wow, everything that I've worked for. And at that point, I was working even harder, right, than Australia at that point. So I knew what it meant to be at that top of my game, the top of the pyramid at that point.
Yeah. And as you're painting this picture about kind of becoming a household name, the sponsorships coming in, in 2004, I feel like the pressure must have really been on. This is now your second Olympics. You're coming off that world championship win we just talked about in 2003. You're a favorite to win gold here. It's in all the headlines. You're all over television. And I think a lot of Canadians, and myself included, will really remember that heartbreaking moment when your heel hit the top of the hurdle. You fell in the final. we've talked a lot about your mother in this interview, and one of the stories from your book that stuck with me is your phone call with her in this moment after that happened. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so picture like you just summed it up, right? World champion, favorite, undefeated going to the Athens Olympics, and I fall in the final, right? And crumbled and just a mess. And I remember my chiropractor just dragging me through the belly of the stadium because I'm inconsolable. I'm just hysterical, and it's just a complete collapse. And they take me to this room and they call my mother because no one knows what to do with me and this moment. And of course, they're all devastated for me. And they call my mother, and you have to imagine, it's 2004. So it's like this huge clunky, like satellite phone with this long antenna. There's like static chipping in and out, but my mother's voice is clear and it's loud. And the first thing that struck me when my mother answered the phone was how clear her voice was and how not shattered it was. And it did not reflect what I was feeling in that moment. And it jarred me. It's like, Mom's not weeping. Mom's not, broken and just like crumbling like I am. Not at all. Not a sign of it. And my mother said to me, dry your eyes, hold your head high. You are the gold, right? And I will never forget her saying, you are the gold, as in you mean more to me and us than anything that you will hang around your neck. We don't care about that. Of course, we know you wanted it, but we care about you, and you are our trophy. You are our medal. And I will always love my mother even more deeply for giving me that in that moment, because what can you say to someone in that moment? But she knew exactly what to say.
Yeah. Wow. I reread that story several times, and I think hearing that story, along with the other stories that you've told about her level of support, her determination, but ultimately her love and just being able to feel that in that moment. Yeah. Wow. You are now an Olympic broadcaster. You actually just recently were in Tokyo. This time, of course, as a commentator for CBC. So, what is it like for you now? I mean, I always think this must be such a unique experience for commentators like you who've actually been Olympians and what's happening there. So, yeah. So tell me about that and kind of what was going through your head this year.
It's my favorite thing to talk about sports and broadcast and be almost like, a guide to viewers as they watch athletes compete. Because you explained, I've been there, I've been through every level of sport, from beginning grassroots to being a professional, and being at, the Olympics and whatnot. So I love it, but I have to say, the blessing with me, I think, is I've had the success and I've had the disappointment and I've had the stuff in between, which makes me really, really measured when I'm talking to other athletes. So I understand their euphoria and I also understand their devastation, right? And it makes it very unique because a lot of broadcasters in sport don't have that dual lens like I have. And so it makes me able to ask the hard questions. And, athletes also know that I'm not there to get them. I'm not there to throw you under the bus or be like, aha, I'm really there to be honest with you. I won't let you off the hook, because if you stunk it up and you stunk it up, we got to call a thing. And I can do that and I will do that, but I'm never there to embarrass you or to break you. That's not why I'm there. I've had athletes, have really bad days. And this is when it gets hard for me to do my job. I've had them have really bad days and then they don't want to talk to me. I've had them run away because it's just been they've lost a bout in boxing, or, they've gotten beaten, they've only gotten the bronze when they should have gotten the gold, and they run away. And my job is really hard on those days because I'm you don't get to do that. And this is my personal philosophy. Everyone holds this, right? Some people feel you should be able to blow past media and do your thing, right? If it's simply for mental health and everything that Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles have gone through, 100% agree and co-sign with that. I'm more talking about instances where it's oh man, I didn't do what I was supposed to do and then I just can't deal with the pressure. And so I avoid. That's hard for me because you should still show up. It is your job to show up. You have to be able to deal with the good days and the bad days. And I mean, in Athens, I spoke to the press right after. That's not for everyone to do, but I knew it was my job. Like, it was part of what I had signed up to do. And so I have to be able to say something. And so it is hard for me on those days where, like, I see an athlete who went in as a favorite and they simply didn't, bring it home. And they're like, yeah, I'm not talking to you. I'm not dealing with you. I'm like, come on, like, dude, like, grow up.
Yeah, it's like one of those moments where you want to just pause and like have an aside, like athlete to athlete aside with them, and give them some advice.
Exactly, and be like a big auntie to them. Be like, come here, let me tell you something, okay? You can't do this, okay? So.
You know what? One of the things I love about watching you as a commentator, and also even just on your social media, is getting that perspective. Because I think as an outsider, for the average person who has never competed at that level, we don't know some of those things that are happening behind the scenes or what's led up to that moment. So I find it really insightful to hear your perspective on some of these situations. So yeah, I just love watching you. And I mean, obviously, like, you have such a great personality for it too. It's just, it's perfect. Yeah. It's really nice to see you finding so much success, obviously, in the second phase, of your kind of career here too. What was it like, slightly off topic, but what was it like being at the Olympics during COVID?
Yeah. The lucky thing for us is, I'm glad you thought I was there because we made it look like I was. I actually stayed in Toronto. So the whole entire hosting, I know, wasn't that cool? The whole entire hosting squad. I'm glad because we weren't like trying to keep it a secret or anything like that. But I think, for me, I didn't want to go to Tokyo with COVID. I have a 2-year-old too, and I keep talking about that. And to me, it was just kind of important to stay close to her. And had that been the only option to go to Tokyo, I would have made the decision not to go. I will also say this, now that the Olympics are over, and I was definitely on the list of people who were like, why are we having an Olympics? Like, this is stupid. Let's not do it, frankly. And that was communicated, to the people that I worked with. But now that it's over, like, I'm happy that they happened. I think it brought people together. I think it was a great distraction. Canadian women in sport crushed it. So there's that, right? And I just think it was a really good thing. And I stand corrected. I could admit when I was wrong about a thing. Like, I was wrong. Like, I'm totally glad they had it.
Yeah. Well, it is an interesting perspective shift to have now. And I mean, there were so few things during the pandemic to kind of get excited about or to bring. Yeah. So you're right. I can see the silver lining, even though, of course, there was a lot of controversy over whether they should go ahead or not.
There was. Yeah.
You mentioned your daughter. I want to talk about your family here. You're married. You have a beautiful daughter, Nova. Yeah. We've talked about, all of your accomplishments. We've talked about your mother, your siblings, your family. But tell me about your future now, and what are you most excited about as you think about your family, this next phase now? You're an author, broadcaster. What's exciting to you now?
You know what? I think watching Nova grow is really fun. Like, and watching another human just find their way and express themselves has been really, really fun. You and I talked about this before we got live and we started recording, where I'm at this phase where now I'm starting to sow into myself more and allow myself to have more me time. And I'm so used to like being the wife and being the mother and, being the ambitious woman that Perdita, just the person, just doesn't always, get fed and I get, what's left over. But I'm going to go into the season now where it's like, no, I'm going to put myself first, only because I was dealing with some burnout or careening towards burnout this year. And I don't want to have that happen again. And I think, to anyone listening, especially, as a career woman and driven woman, sometimes like your ambition can get the better of you. And you always want to be like doing something and accomplish something and like moving in the direction of your dreams. And I'm learning for the first time at 41 years old that it's okay to stand still. It's okay to be like, oh yeah, I see my North Star. Oh, isn't it pretty? But I'm just going to stop here for a while, like a long while, maybe longer than I planned to. And that's okay. Because I think if you keep like trudging and going in this one direction of this thing, sometimes you stop you don't stop enough to enjoy who you are at the time and where your life is at the time. You speed through your life too much. And I can honestly admit that that's how my last few years have been. And I just don't want to do that. So I want to spend more time with my family, more time with this version of myself, because I won't be this version of me, forever. And I'll move on to something else. And it's really honestly, Priya, just being still and just truly enjoying my life. If COVID has taught me anything, it's like nothing is guaranteed. I know it's cliche, but it's really like, who thought we'd be living in a pandemic right now, right? And we know how many people have suffered through this. It's like, let's just enjoy who we are and, and what we are right now.
Oh, that is such good advice. And I feel like I needed to hear that right now. And I'm sure there are people watching and listening who needed to hear that too. Perdita, it was such a pleasure talking to you. I thank you so much for your honesty, for your openness, for sharing your story. And I'm excited to watch and see what's next for you and also to support you in some of that downtime too.
Oh, thank you, Priya. It was so awesome talking to you.
Yeah, this was really wonderful. And thank you so much to all of you for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Please follow along or subscribe to us on YouTube if you're enjoying the show. If you or someone you know has an amazing turning point, we would love to hear about it as well. You can email us at turningpoint@priyasam.com. Until next time, take good care of yourselves and of each other.